Welcome to another episode of the Information Addicts Podcast. My name is Cassidy. I'm an information addict, and this is my podcast where I explore information, ideas, and beliefs, try to do those things more responsibly. Today I have a conversation with my friend Chezi. Chezi is someone I've met through my online participation on different Discords and being in what some call this little corner of the internet. And it was lovely to get a chance to sit and talk with him a little more one-on-one and learn a little more about his story. And we got a chance to talk about, participation in community and particularly what we're doing here online and even some of the dynamics that come with male and females in the space and how we're navigating that and learning to ground that in our own communities. So I really enjoyed the conversation, so I hope you do too. Chezi, thank you for coming on and having a conversation with me.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. No, it's really great to get a chance to sit one-on-one. I know we've had a couple conversations in group chats and such, and last week or 2 weeks ago, we had a good chat, but it's nice to sit and get to know you a little bit more.
Definitely. I've heard your name and I've seen your face around this little corner. And I've identified you, as far as I'm concerned, as someone, one of the OGs, as they say, or specifically also when Paul Vanderklay, he uploaded a video from Thunder Bay, I think, and you were hosting the Q&A. Am I making that up?
No, that was Catherine. Catherine did Thunder Bay. I helped with the Bridges and Meaning Festival in Germany.
Sorry, Bridges and Meaning. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And yeah, so I was like, okay, she's like in the thicket, she's asking questions. And it was more than that. You sort of also told people, like, come on, guys, like, ask questions. And I like that because it showed that you were invested in this little corner. And this was sort of in a backdrop to, Jacob is making his own moves. And I have been considering playing around with having potentially an event in Israel. So seeing you do that, from this little space into reality was very nice. So I'm glad we're speaking as well.
Yeah, no, I am one of the original randos. I actually came up with the term randos. That's my claim to fame. So,
nice.
But yeah, I've gotten so much from being a part of this, and I think what Paul does and the way that he engages with people is like the next level of like what is needed to have these sort of like honest, earnest conversations about like what it is to figure out life we live and the questions of meaning. So I believe it in a lot. It's oh man, it's messy, but it's kind of beautiful in its own way. But before we get too far, why don't you give people a little bit of about Chezi? Who are you? What's your story?
All right. My name is Chezi, but people do call me Chezi sometimes.
I'm sorry, it's my American.
Fine. It's short for Ezekiel. I live in Israel, husband to Annie, and father of 3 beautiful, wonderful children. I have an architecture design management firm. It's what I do in the day-to-day. And I previously had a background in law. And then there's being an officer in the Israeli Air Force. And before that, there is 6 years in sort of like a theological seminary. And then there's high school.
Yeah, you've lived 7 different lives, I guess.
Yeah. So I've had my own little journey in this miracle land called Israel. My parents are both from the States, both met in Cleveland, grew up in Cleveland. And one of 6, big family, very large extended family, 90 people, a lot of got to be loud, you got to be active. So that's, I would say, my story in a nutshell. And what brings me to this little corner, uh, like others, I was also aware of the Jordan Peterson phenomena, and specifically for me, hearing him use, terminology that I use every day with my sons when we pray, or hearing him give a biblical series, which, these are ancient traditions of ours in a certain extent, or a certain, there's things that are sounding so novel but yet so familiar. People in our synagogues are passing out, when the rabbi is speaking. He's like filling arenas. And I was like, okay, how is he doing this? And so there was like a deep dive in that. My father's a psychologist. He's a Freudian psychologist, but there was a lot of Jung and sort of that conversation around the house. And my father has his own theological take through the prism of psychology. So it was very familiar, and it was beautiful to sort of see the culture take that in, and then down this rabbit hole. And I think, I don't know, somehow I can't remember right now, but I think I saw Jacob on his channel, and then he's his own little, he's he has his own little gravity that sucks interesting people in. And yeah, and ever since then I sort of started having this conversation, which led to a a more, I guess, a more specific uh, interest, which is, working together with other religions, sort of interfaith, but not in a kumbaya sense. And I've been talking about this in Little Corner about not it only being like a safe space, but actually like a brave space where people could feel very comfortable to express themselves. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I guess so. That's sort of what I've been playing in right now. And it feels, a lot of these conversations are sort of like modern day Talmud, sort of ancient Talmud studies, where you just see philosophy and myth and culture all intertwined in this beautiful conversation, which is happening like live. So I'm just excited to sort of be a part of something that seems very alive and authentic. Um, when I'm not living real life, I guess, but this is also very real.
Yeah, it's this weird world where there's a part of it that doesn't fully connect to reality because it lives in this alternate dimension almost. But yeah, you get struck by how real it is, especially when you meet face to face with these people you've been talking on the internet for years. And I don't know if you know this, I met my husband through the British Meeting Discord. So I very much know that like feeling of, almost understanding the limitations of it and understanding it's not reality, but having some of those relationships feel more real than other things that I had in my life. So it's kind of a weird world. And yeah, it's funny. It's hard to describe what exactly it is, what we're creating, because they're certainly not safe spaces. Because you're you're likely to get challenged by your ideas, and you're going to see things you don't quite find comfortable, and you have to wrestle with that with not only yourself but with others. But it's certainly like an open space or a good space in a sense where it feels like people can come and work through those things and not not feel like it's the end of the world to say the wrong thing.
It makes me think of, in the early days in the States, you would have go west, young man, like go out to the frontier. So, the new frontier is the technological frontier in some sense, and definitely like the internet. And we see in social media and, Twitter being an example that it could be very, there's a lot of gunslingers out there.
Yeah, for modern day cowboys.
Right. So this little corner does allow you to, in a sense, go west. However, the exploration is not, you're not gonna, you're you should be able to have a safe landing, even if while you're falling. And I think it's okay to, uh, get lost or be lost to then find yourself again. I guess that there's always that balance that you have to be dancing, but you know, there seems to be a sense that in this corner, uh, that descent is guided, and you don't really have to feel like you're doing it alone necessarily. And even someone coming from like, it's sort of deconstruction is sort of pre-proposed in this corner already. They're like, hey, yeah, like sure, we could talk about this. We could talk about like from if you're looking at it from a materialistic point of view. So it really is fascinating to me. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, there's so many people in so many different stages, right? And it's not a place to live. It's certainly like this transition space where this, it's like the watering hole. Like to try to, and that's where it sort of gets tricky because sometimes we talk about it like in this institutional sense or this like almost church-like sense, and that makes me uncomfortable. Like that's not what this is supposed to be or was ever supposed to be. But like it's been interesting to see the way that going into it and having people participate in it has been able to get people to find homes elsewhere and like dig roots and tend metaphorical gardens. And I don't know, I think that's really beautiful to me.
I agree, and specifically stressing the point where you're saying that that it's not a church. I've used the analogy of um, sort of like again like a toolkit, and specifically like when I connect where I connect it to the Talmud, which is because people jump on and off of these streams like sort of throughout the day,
Mhm.
and it's you are sort of refilling yourself with this sort of relates to again like in tribalism or these different groups, and I'm sure you have this in Christianity after with different sects, but in the ancient times before GPS, if someone's on a ship or on a boat, they are required to use the stars to navigate. And it's not
Mm.
just the North Star, but it's the North Star in relation to the other stars. Um, there is a midrash Judaism that talks about when the splitting of the sea, the sea actually split into 12 different openings for each of the tribes. And the
Mm.
tribes saw each other when they were walking through like these like windows between. And they they say they knew that God was before them, but they did not see his footsteps. And you could look at this as uh, the different tribes all have represent different versions of sort of worshiping God and trying to get close. And however, you're not you're never sure that you're going the right direction, and you're looking around to see and orient yourself through your neighbor, through your person around you,
Mm.
really trying to see if they're also trying to follow through in God's footsteps, even if it's a little different than me. Am I oriented properly? So I think in a certain way this is sort of used as a compass for certain people. Have these conversations, come out, see in live, and then see how someone comments about that in like a very meta perspective. So it's been useful in that sense where I get to like throw in a theological idea and then see that sort of develop. And then by next week, I have a whole different like product that I can now sort of test out in the real world, whether that be with my work, kids, family.
Yeah. I mean, and man, there's so many different sort of spirits that manifest that place as well. In the sense that like there are the times you're in the conversations and you get those ideas challenged and you're breaking it apart and like trying to make sense of it. And then there's other times where it's much more grounded in sort of um, story and personal personal struggles. And there's that beauty of having both of those available, where it's not all just personal, soft, fuzzy. How do you feel about that? There's still that challenge of like breaking down ideas and trying to understand them and sort of build up. But um, it never feels like you're at war. It almost feels like we're all coming together, like trying to figure something out collectively. And like there's a certain respect in the way that you have all these people with different ideas, and it's not so evangelical in the sense where you're trying to get me here and I'm trying to get you here, and like there's that fight. I'm sure there are certain people who have that intent of like, oh well, I'd hope it would lead this way, but it doesn't feel like that's the front.
It sounds like you're describing like, an argument for heaven's sake, right? Like this is really, it seems like everyone's really coming from a good faith position, and many times, and this is a term that's, thrown out there today about like steel manning, but you really do have that sense of people really coming in and trying to give, really see the best in people. And I understand that things, at times things spiral out of control, and there's
Yeah.
incidents, as there always are, but that's life.
Yeah.
Um, so yes, I agree with you that this and it's still in its manifestation stages. I know there was people that were worried about naming it sort of already is taking away from its natural progression, because like you're already creating like a timestamp, but that's how we progress as
Yeah.
certain things get labeled. I also think that is one of the gifts and responsibilities we have as humans, like, which is to really see these things and identify these things and these patterns and try to, in a certain sense, interact with them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tricky because it's like, what are we doing here? And like it's easy to say, oh, don't call it, don't name it, just let it be. Yet there's a certain part of the humanity in us that we need to identify it as something. It's like have a concept with it and to be able to function and talk about it in sort of a grander scope. But yeah, it's very weird because it still feels uncertain of like, well, what is it? We use these words, but what does that actually mean? And what will that look like as this keeps going?
I'm sorry if I you'll tell me if you tire of my biblical reference.
No,
But
I love them. I'm a huge Bible nerd.
but this again, which is what is alluring about this little corner is, first of all, the fact that it's defined by it being like, this more abstract idea of this being this little corner, right? So you have tension already there. But the Tower of Babel, its construction was also due to their certainty of their understanding of these terms, while realizing uh, more, they're more diverse. And here there seems to be a lot of um, different terminology. Let's just sprinkle on John Vervaeke a little, right? Throw on those 4 Ps, and it seems many times that people are not sure what those terms mean. However, in a certain sense, are embodying those terms or talking about those terms, that there's a flow about that. So uh, that's why, to me, it looks like, while we're a lot less certain, I don't want to say a tower, but you have a sense of creation and building that's actually happening well. And in a sense, from different languages, right? You're hearing different voices, different perspectives. But this, to me, again, is sort of looking through these windows. And so I'm not sure. I can't see the footsteps, but it's allowing me to create orientation or orient myself properly. So
Yeah. No, I really love that depiction of like looking through windows, because that's what it seems like we're doing. We really are like watching each other and trying to orient ourselves in a place where I feel like most people who come and are earnestly returning are seeking to orient themselves in the right way to the divine in whatever way they can see that or can conceive of it, right? And so, yeah, there's that interesting ability to watch and see and engage.
definitely, I'll see how far. Definitely, as we are all experiencing our own exodus in a certain extent. Right. So when you're looking at past to the right or to the left, you're realizing like, why should I be looking through this window for this person? Because this person over here this brother of mine, this sister of mine, is also feeling the exodus. He
Mhm.
realizes that we are moving on from a certain state into a new state, right? So,
Yeah.
like, and we see like data points of that, whether it be scatter. It could be a Trump election. It could be a Elon Musk buying Twitter. It could be like the fact that the world now is like aware of the dangers now of AI. So all these things could be like, wow, there's a major phase shift. So
Yeah.
as people search for meaning again, right? So we're looking around, right? And it's okay to realize that we could be in one of those 12 openings, and it could be we're on our own path. That doesn't that still allows room for the other.
Mhm.
So in in an ironic sense, Jacob has created a phenomenal space on his server where there is like this mix, this salad of beautiful different theological ideas sort of being woven together.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting to see the way that the patterns of other traditions, whether it's in my faith or not, um, relate to each other and can teach us something. That's really beautiful. And I think that's for me why this sort of thing is exciting, because it takes you outside of the realm of I have capital T truth and I know it and I'm defending it. And, I want to convince everybody else to see it and recognizes, hey, there's that in other places as well. There's things to learn from all of these other traditions. And
I would think so. I would agree and say that it almost couldn't be any other way. Like it's it becomes sad for me because I could be reading certain texts of rabbis that would, let's say, and I wouldn't say this is as so common, but still around, where they will, let's say, identify Muhammad as a legitimate prophet. And at the same time, on the ground, there could be a member of the Israeli parliament who is quite racist against Arabs and is religious. And now it's so sad that he's not aware of this rabbi's take, because if that was your framing, then you're talking about a completely different world. And when I hear about when you look at Christianity from a Jewish perspective as a monolith, and then you suddenly be like, oh, but there's like a Unitarian, and there's this, and there's that, and there's like all these different kinds. So suddenly there's conversation is completely different. And um, uh, I think that finding, and again, this is all very biblical, where you have uh, and these verses I think should be stressed more as they become more relevant. Beautiful about the Bible, which is its timeliness, but when you have to recognize when the Assyrian king comes and prays at the temple and then leaves to go pray to his God, that is we are being told that this is an option of a reality that we could manifest, where there could still, from a Jewish perspective, I could still have a temple, and that doesn't mean I can't share that, it being called like a house of prayer for all the nations, while they are still having their own versions of their own theological technology. I could appreciate the East and its understandings of theology, while also having my truth, so to speak, which is why, in a certain sense, postmodernism allows for a certain amount of flexibility with terminology and ideas. Relates could map on with ideas in Kabbalah or / mysticism, which also allow you to use terms like infinity or Ein Sof, which allow you to expand your imagination and your understanding. So postmodernism, which gets a very bad rap because it is a very dangerous philosophy. Again, in it, there are holy sparks that could be still gathered and used.
Right. Well, I tend to believe that any idea that gains prominence, even if it's a bad one or a dangerous one, has some sparks of truth, beauty, or goodness in it. And so it's like that, I don't know, that belief of like, well, how do we find a better search for those things? And the recognition of like the differences do matter. At least I think the differences do matter. Yet, like, if we don't give enough space to recognize the true things about those things, or the desirable and good things about these other ideas that we don't hold for ourselves, we're doing a disservice to understanding like the fullness of like the world we live in anyways. Because like no one would hold any idea if there wasn't any redeeming quality about it. Certainly maybe there's something better out there, but
Well, I mean, listen, you could say, in a sense, there are bad ideas. I mean, very quickly, maybe not intuitively, but I think very quickly you end up being, in a question of like, what's bad, what's evil, that
yeah.
these things exist. Because I am a believer that, as part of the gift of, or at least the sense of free will, this world itself allows for, these things to manifest.
Yeah.
And that's its own topic. But, but
100%.
but I felt like the dark cloud like ascending on me as I discussed it. Um, uh, but in Israel, there's been a lot of political strife and tensions between factions of society. But the rabbi in synagogue was talking about how he read this poem, Messiah's Hat. And in this poem, it's about the Messiah comes, and he presents himself to a certain group, and they're like, "Well, you can't be the Messiah. Like that's the wrong hat size." And he's like, "Oh," he moves the hat. They're like, "No, that's like." So he goes to a different group, and they're like, "Your skull cap, your yarmulke is the wrong color." So he goes to another one. They're like, "Where's your hat?" He's like, "But the guy's other told to take the hat off." In the end, he ends up leaving, and he says, "You guys still can't see, the difference with each other. You're not ready for me yet." He was sort of talking out to the community, sort of stressing the fact that they're, that we talk a big game, but there's still so much. We create so many fences and so many boundaries between it that that very quickly we're othering each other, and again, and then you allow yourself at the same time to pray or throw around terms like grace or righteousness or love. So so it's there's a cognitive dissonance in the end of the day, and some of this is due to the fact that as a society we're less enchanted. Specifically as a Jewish people, we have a 2,000-year exile, which really created a very codified practice religion, and sort of which is very masculine in a certain perspective, and reconnecting back to the feminine, to the land, to the prophetic, to the more mysterious or intuitive. It takes time, which is what's sort of beautiful, specifically in this, or at least what I feel, that I've been fortunate enough to now be part of a people that's now back in its land, and get to potentially revive and participate in that revival of connecting to the land and to the nature, you know while while engaging with with society and other lofty ideas. But right now I'm sort of embarrassed with the state of how politically we've been behaving.
Mm. Yeah, and before we started recording, that's sort of the topic we were going to bring to the table of like division. Is this sort of the division you were thinking about, or was there other parts of like division in a broader sense that has been on your mind?
Well, this specifically was the division I was I was thinking about recently, just because it's created such an effect, and not to get into like really the political conversation, but more how um for a long time Israel in a certain sense has a very, because also its size, gets to use terminology like brother and sister and sort of mean it. So like that was sort of the sense on the road, while Israelis could be very harsh and rude. Like, an example would be that you're going to have 15 different cars stop for you on the side of the road if you have like you've got to change your tire. But all of them are going to be berating you about why you like it's your fault, you drove the wrong car, like what do you think? But while helping you, giving you water. So it's this sort of tough love, but you're part of the family. And uh it was sort of devastating, not shocking, but devastating to see sort of a biblical rift again, like there how there was with Judah and the kingdom of Israel. And here again, there terminology was like that, similar to that was used like last week about like the division between the groups over here. And then I listened to PVK sometimes talk about the divisions between the different sects and the arguments going on between them. And I don't know, it makes you wonder again, like I was saying earlier, about how seriously we take the words we say, about the kind of world we want to manifest, and the kind of space we want to allow for each other. Which, when I see someone like Father Stephen DeYoung come on to Jacob's channel and have conversations with him, so I was like, okay, so yeah, so there is real conversation, and I see that there's real dialogue, and they're digging and they're looking because they're searching for truth, which is one of God's names. And and that I'll use another example over here. There is a rabbi named Rabbi Kook, and he believed in this triangle of the land of Israel, the people of Israel, and the Torah of Israel. And if you have that triangle, if you proper geometry, then that's the success story. That's the recipe for like, moving on. And he was hopeful that us returning to the land would be like sort of the beginning of that revival, which in a certain sense is true. However, the secular didn't all turn Orthodox or religious in Israel. There are other rabbis that looked at that geometry and decided to play with it a little and say that it's true that it could be a triangle, but it needs to be in rotation. There are times where the focus needs to be on the people, and there are times where the focus needs to be on the nation and on there. So I wouldn't say this is a call for religious Jews to violate what they think is true from a practice point of view, but as far as like trying to push on policy, or let's say Torah values, if you feel that there's going to be a rift that's going to devastate the land or the people, maybe it's not worth it. Maybe you have to turn that triangle and focus differently. So even when I look at the Christian community, like, is where does that triangle get turned? Where do you say like, okay, like if I focus on this difference too long, there's going to be a division over here. I'm saying, now he can't be part of this congregation. Is that creating too much of a rift? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think for me, especially coming from Christianity, and I was born in a non-denominational Protestant family, so you very much know that sense of like division and that that rift. I mean, and it certainly exists between Catholics and Protestants, but you have all of these layers of Protestants within Protestants, and then there's Orthodoxy, and Protestants don't know what to do with that.
And different orthodoxies, right? I'm saying you have what's going on in Germany, you have what's going on in England, you have what's going on here.
Yeah, and so there's yeah, there's that that tension. And yeah, it's interesting, watching it and sort of seeing what's the answer to it. And it's funny how many people turn to political policy to find the answer. And I've just the more that I dug and understood politics and political policies, the more that I have a bit of skepticism in the power they have to fix things, in the sense that there's a lot of our laws are poorly written. First of all, they're written purposely sort of ambiguous and confusing, and it doesn't stop the attitude, which is the problem in a lot of the issues we're trying to fix, versus the thing on the rule on the book. And yeah, there's this level of in which where especially in America, I don't know exactly the political system in Israel, so I'm very ignorant about that. But like in America, there's all this sense that like the president has all this power, and every time there's an election cycle, everybody's up in arms. And then you really look at it, it's like, well, how much power does the president really have? At least in what's happening in your local cities, it's probably better for you to focus on local government, and even then, it's probably better to focus on your neighbor, or your like the people you sit next to in the pew or whatever. Like we have far more control in the way that we can sort of orient ourselves in that. And like for me, I think I always see it. I liked when you said, we're kind of in Exodus, because it feels like the way that I understand the biblical narrative, it's like in many ways we are in exile. Doesn't matter what kingdom we live under, but like we're under Babylon rule. And as a Christian, there's this belief that your kingdom and your king is someone else. And so how do you live within this worldly kingdom while serving a different king? And yeah, a lot of that moves to like trusting, like that we have a generous host, and that we can build beautiful gardens wherever we are. But yeah,
I mean, that resonates.
But I mean, I think the division for me, it's like, it's hard, because I felt more of the whole of it, or like the immediate sense of it when I was a Protestant, just because there was all of these sort of like denominations. And I was in a lot of evangelical churches, so there's a goal to like convert, or at least that's like a hope for people. And I certainly had complicated relationships with all of that, but there was that that feeling of like, hey, we're so confident in like the type of world that we have, and we're like, in some ways we're spurring more of that division by fighting a cause to bring people in. And I think for me it was hard, because it was like, well, I didn't even know the complications of all of these divisions. Like there's far too many, and it's so vast. Like how do we even start to have good conversations about that? And like I mean, it's certainly still, I see it in Orthodoxy, it's just not as felt. Probably just because I myself have felt like the best thing to do to avoid the division is to like try my best to understand and like pour into the thing that is true, and just let that be what changes me and transforms me and like informs me. And yeah, I guess too, being Orthodox, in Orthodox Christianity, there's this sort of belief that, you know, we don't know, we can't say where God isn't, or yeah, we can't say where God isn't, but you know, we can recognize where God is, and that's sort of where that's how you operate within the faith of like trying to hold our best to see God in this church and like participate with that. And yeah, I guess it softens the blow of the division, but it's still sort of there, and you're yeah, you it can feel overwhelming.
In Kabbalah, there's a term in Aramaic. It's late atar panui mine. Means there is no space void of you. And sort of like panentheism, where you see, you know, God is everywhere, God is in everything, in a certain extent. And while that could be overwhelming, that is also very freeing in a certain sense, where you get identified everywhere. And this relates sort of to the conversation we were having earlier about identifying those sparks. I've spoken about this before online, but trying to be as charitable as I can to Kanye West as I do. Even when he goes and says, talking about Hitler, from what I understand, what he was trying to do was also identify the sparks. Now, you could be like, don't do that when you are having a mental breakdown on like online, right? So, but
yeah, he was very clearly manic.
no doubt.
Yeah.
My point being, you know, we have us also saying that, which is that even if you identify a truly, fully wicked person, you have to try to search for him, and you have to try to identify some good in him.
Yeah.
And by identifying just that little good, you allow him to, you know, recognize that in himself, and then actually elevate himself to that place, and then hopefully he could start making his way out. So, but you know, at the end of the day, when there's a student driver in front of me taking his time, I want to, like, you know, I'm not thinking in favor of him. I want his car to flip over and get out of my way immediately. So it's difficult. You know, we all say that, and then there's that person next to you, you know, clicking a pen. So to then tell yourself, you know, I'm going to see the you know, good. I'm going to see the godliness in him, the divine in him, and this relates to Martin Buber's philosophy of I vow, seeing, like, you know, the divine happening between two people and recognizing that between two people. But we also, when the Bible talks about Moses seeing God sort of face to face, it mentions that is as if he would be seeing his neighbor, which is sort of identifying to you that Moses would, when he was seeing the people around him, he was already seeing the God in them, which made him so fantastic, which in a certain sense, also something that's been talking about in this corner, is also what's so enticing to many people about psychedelics. That is, in a certain sense, a shortcut to, you know, being one with Gaia, or, you know, being one with everything, or there's many different versions of how you'd want to identify that, but it allows you then to look at your neighbor in a certain sense and actually feel connected. And doing that through scripture or practice or mindfulness, very tedious work. And yes, Judaism tries to really lock that down with, from when your eyes open. You know, which shoe are you going to put on first? How are you going to tie your laces? Like, the whole day is sort of locked in that to constantly create a framework where this is how you see the world, where you are going to be forced in a certain, or indoctrinated into this mind frame, which has many times paradoxical effects if not done well.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, it's well, it's interesting because in Orthodox Christianity, you have a similar pattern, right? Where there's much more structure and orientation, and there's like more group culture and identity, whereas the type of Protestant I came from, it was more individualistic, where, you know, everybody oriented themselves to God in whatever way felt right for them, and there wasn't a lot of like understanding of how to do that. And that has its own complications. But yeah, there's that. Yeah, it's that tricky balance of like the structures can bring incredible good, and they give you that sort of intentionality, especially if you understand the why behind what you're doing, and give you that intentionality and connection in every moment to like how you want to orient yourself. But yeah, there's, like you said, there's that there's that paradox there where it also has a great danger as well. And I think sometimes that's why you're seeing so many people leaving, at least like Christianity and Protestantism. There was a lot of what, but not a clear understanding of why, and how we got to the why and the what. Yeah, and I think that creates a lot of division too, because we run with these sort of narratives that we're very confident about. We're confident about this is what this means, and that's how this is. And I'm grateful. It's interesting, like the divisions that were happening around the world, and like in my country and in politics, were the things that sort of broke my categories to the place that left me being so certain. And so in this like paradoxical way, it's like the division kind of led me to a place where like I was ready to break down the walls and like understand what it was to have more unity. And I don't know if I would have known that without that sort of like to be faced with like the extremes of division.
I mean, that goes back full circle to this little corner, which is, a brave space, which if you're going to get lost, that's how you're going to find yourself. And you go to set to get smacked in the face with reality or realities of these different like versions of truth or layers of truth or different vantage points that you never took advantage. You never had a chance to see it through that perspective, in that perspective. Right, that could be devastating though. Definitely when you walk in potentially without a compass, right? So you and arguably you could say, and this is just me guessing right now, but you have you're into making movies or documentaries or in film, I think.
Yeah. That's what I got my degree in,
So you are already further along than some, where you already have some sort of like passion, idea, career, where even your questions, you could say like, well, I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to try to solve them through my toolkit. Right. So I'm going to film, I'm going to look, I'm going to see, I'm going to have a podcast, talk to a Jew, do a live stream, right? So I'm going to do it through my method. You have people that have nothing, right? Or they get, completely, get completely lost. Artists, I think like a true artist, there's sort of like a pressure from society. You could think of like a Jackson Pollock piece. And you could be like, oh, like he's been doing this for like 4 years already. Like, when are we getting like new, right? Where's the new stuff? Like an artist has to go through a period where he's allowed to make like micro improvements or fail and fail and fail again, because there has to be a process where they get lost again and then reorient themselves. Now a idea like a real artist or real master will either be able to really tweak what seems to some as the same, but it really is like a different level. There's a different medium there. Potentially reinvent himself in a certain place, and some, stay stale. But we sort of want answers immediately, and And there's and we've been seeing this sort of even with the rise of AI, which is just like let it keep on making mistakes so it could so it could better itself. But we're all saying like look at this novel thing, like how is it how is it so smart? And the answer is we keep on feeding it everything we have to constantly error on and then just like autocorrect constantly. We have even though humans are very impressive that way about adapting, seemingly in this novel time, it's hard for us to course correct. So I mean, I guess I would ask you in your from your current resurfacing to this place. You came back, I think, like a few months ago. You did like a video that I'm coming back. I'm going to start filming again. Something in that nature.
Yeah.
So you're reattempting to use your tool to frame. How's that been? It's been I don't know, however long it's been.
I mean, honestly, it's been hard.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, I love this thing that I do. I love getting to talk to people like you and like play with ideas and wrestle with them and like give people a space to make mistakes and not be unredeemed by them and be able to work through ideas and say what they believe and be heard and like not placated, but like built in relationship with those things. But yeah, it has opposition, and that's felt. And yeah, I think for me, while I love this space, I recognize like there is a danger to it. And there's certainly a responsibility that comes with being with it, like a part of it and creating with it. And so, yeah, for me, I think it's been hard to kind of figure out, well, how do I go forward responsibly? And how do I face the division and not turn into the worst version of myself when when faced with harsh opposition, because it's I don't get it often, but I look in the world, I know it's coming. I mean, like it's already come. And that was just a small sort of dose of it. And yeah, I look around. I've been doing a lot of auditing and looking around at like other people and the way that they're reacting to it and handling it. And I don't generally what I'm seeing, I don't like. And not to say in this corner, sort of like adjacent corners that don't quite exist here. And I think a part of that is this sort of like truth first mentality where, we have to fight for truth and stand for that no matter what it costs in defense for the good. And we lose sight of like, well, what is it to be a beautiful person? And what does that mean to orient ourselves well with other people? And like recognize that humanity in everyone, even in the face of like really poor behavior or what we feel is like the spread of really dangerous ideas. And I don't have the answers to it, but I think that there's something that's happening in this corner that will help me maybe not find it, but orient myself better. So it's like you just take the steps and you keep going. And yeah, I used to be able to sit down 20 minutes, write out a script and go out. And now it's like 3 days and I'm, fumbling over which word is more right and more what I mean and can be less taken out of context. And I think it's both hurting me and servicing me. But yeah, there's that place where it's like you just have to wrestle through it.
At any point, you could tell me it's none of my business, but I
It's none of your
also
business. No, just kidding.
uh,
I'm pretty open book.
you when did you get married?
In October. Yeah,
So,
October 23rd. Oh my gosh, I should know the date I got married. October 23rd, I think, or the 24th. It was a Sunday.
it's all about love, the dates. I don't remember when my kids' birthdays are. You know, like I love them forever.
My sister-in-law got us a poster with like the date on it, so I can just check that later and be like, oh, okay.
That I would imagine that shift, that change or upgrade. What's your husband's name?
30. Ferdi.
Ferdy.
Ferdi, yeah.
Oh, so when I got married to my wife, I married with my wife. My brother told me, he's like, there's no more Chezi. He's like, now there's Chezi. It's like a new entity that, and that, gets, that actualizes obviously when you have children, and there's different levels to that. But Cassidy's struggles, right, now have been put into this new entity, um, which allows you, in a certain extent, to have like your own little hive mind, with him, with this person. I'm not saying you're not your own individual and more power to you, and like, women. But uh, do you sense that union created more clarity, more confusion, with relation to like, your mission over here? Because do you feel like I'm coming into this now as like a different Cassidy, and this person also has different, is oriented differently now, as because she's a new person. So I was wondering if that in any way
Yeah,
related.
I mean, like I think it's funny because my priest was telling us in Orthodoxy, they don't pronounce marriages, they just crown them. So there was this sort of like sense that we were already in the process of being married before we walked down that aisle, exchanged the rings, and wore the
It's very
crowns.
nice.
Yeah, that's sort of beautiful. And so in the sense we had already kind of oriented ourselves of like our lives are coming together, and we're waiting for that moment till we crown them, but there's that moving. And so it's been a long time, because we dated for 2 years before we were able to get married. And so there's been a long time of like losing the old me
Okay.
in the place of this new thing. But like going down that aisle and doing that thing, I think it is this whole another step. In some ways it feels the same and it's a continuation, but there's that other step of the recognition of like, hey, I'm married to this person. And so that there's that process of being one with them, and that real realization that what I do here and the things that come from here, they affect that person too. And yeah, I think that adds another level of like, like one is like responsibility and sort of not debilitatingly so, but like there's just like I really feel that pressure of like acting well, because man, he's like, he really is like the best of the things I'm not, if that makes any sense. And and he's being with him has grown me in those levels. And so I care more about him than myself in a lot of those actions. And so on one hand, it makes it harder. The other hand, it makes it a lot easier because he has this incredible trust in me, which I don't know why, but he has this incredible trust in me. And yeah, and this like sort of willingness to kind of like follow my intuitions and those things. So he's not too concerned about it. I'm probably more concerned about it. But yeah, that, and then being pregnant, there's a whole nother life that's like, I'm gonna be here in how many months? And I think that has added just even another level, because there's that there's that acknowledgement that this little thing, this little being in here, they're gonna see the things I do, and like they're going to witness that. And I don't want it to be something that they don't see in their home. I don't want it to be like a two-faced version, or a corrupted version. Like, in the other side, I don't want this thing to corrupt what I bring into my house. I don't know. Does that answer your question?
That does, in a certain sense, answer my question. And I guess it raises a question. It not to raise a question, but it makes you make one, really think about, when I become a mother, or when I become a wife, do my values change? Right? Like that's like another reorientation in a certain sense. Really, we believe that, or at least my experience has been, that those, when I married my wife, it was like, oh, of course. Like you just said, like crowning, where it just feels like this is what it was always supposed to be. Like I thought I knew what I was, but now I see I'm more me with this person. And then, having a child, aside from the fact of like actually, I tell my kids, like, they're like, look, like something impressive. I'm like, I make people. You know what I'm talking about? I'm like, this is like a huge deal. So it's crazy. But again, that's a very feeling more you in a certain sense. And obviously as a mother, there's a whole physiological component to that, of course.
Yes.
Right. Which on behalf of all men, I thank you for um your journey. But so, that very quickly separates, in a certain sense, men from the boys, or the women from the girls. But from single to married, from married to mother, you know it's like sort of a refocus for you on what you want to be doing over here. So
Yeah.
I do very much think about it, even in this space, am I creating a better future for my child? Am I allowing for a space? And personally, I have to, like you said about responsibility and like the pushback. I'm in this new synagogue that we've been going to, and if they were aware of the shenanigans I'm up to in this little corner, no bueno. They would be like, no, 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 like this is not going to fly. However, and in theory, it could affect schools my son would want to get into, right? Institute I studied at and taught at would not hire me now if they thought I was. I mean, Jacob calls me a heretic, right? So that's not be doing so well. So there is a sense of responsibility, but I think I'm doing it for the right reasons. But that weighs on you, and I don't even know that we think about it, like, this will be here, quote unquote, forever, right? Like these recordings, these channels, and go now. You allow. What's amazing about long form is it allows, if there's a mask, it allows it to slip, and you get to see the real, and that is amazing. Hence, politicians avoid these long form conversations. However, you could expose yourself. You could end up talking nonsense. You could end up going like nowhere, and then get lost in a loop of like, why on earth are you doing this? I had to think about that in this little corner, which I'm fairly new in, but I was like, I'm a face that's being seen suddenly a lot. And is that because the fact, like, why am I here? What am I doing here? Is this just cool for me that people think I'm like, oh, it's a novel to talk to this like Jewish guy over here, and like, it's like, eh, is there like an ego play over here? Do I need someone telling me that like that's nice, and like that would be the wrong reason to be like not, I don't know, not in bed right now, not working now? What, my client's waiting for their color of marble, right? Like, why am I not emailing them right now about this? And said, like, how am I justifying this conversation?
Yeah.
I hope it's because I'm reaching out across the, interlink to create a connection with someone, to see God's tapestry, to see more, to understand myself better. And when I say that, even that sentence, how much of that is tailored in my mind of like, this sounds good, and then what's the percentage of that which is like, oh, that's genuine, or that's like, there's that second delay of I'm being seen. So one has to take himself seriously, wanting to engage in that and be genuine with themselves.
Yeah. Well, and like, there's so much masking in the culture, and I've never been the best at it. Like, I'm sure I wear masks, and I understand like there's there's different versions of me, but I'm not a good I don't like to be fake or something that I'm not. And I don't know, like there's also that that lived experience where there's consequences that come from that. And yeah, it's like when you start to recognize that maybe there's obligations on you in the way that you live in the world that aren't best defined by my own internal desires. It makes it harder because yeah, there's that having to wrestle with the thing. Well, what is that obligation, and how well am I succeeding at it? And like, I think you mentioned the physical part of like what it is to carry a kid. Like, I think that heightens that in the recognition of like it changes your body in so many ways, and all of a sudden you're not able to do and move the way that you used to. It's physically made me slow down because I cannot move at the speed I used to. And it's this like obligation that is allowing me to like bring physical life into the world. And so there's a lot of that. And I think especially, I've been wrestling a lot with the idea of, like the masculine and the feminine and those roles, and what does that look like? And the way modern society has totally broken those down and flipped those around and shrouded them in mystery, and somewhat denied the fact that there's truth to some of these patterns. And like, the more I pull the thread and look into it, the more I feel like that's probably not true. But yeah, what story makes the most sense? What obligations should I best be attaining to like be the best woman I can be? I mean, choosing to become a mother has taught me some of it, but there's this chasm that I feel like, oh wow, I've I don't know if I have to cross it, but I have to understand it in the better sense. And yeah, there's that question of like, as a woman, what is my role here in estuary? Because there's been talks of, making it male only, which
Really?
from some, yes. And I mean, for me, it's like, well, if you want to do that, I'm not going to stop you, but I think I don't know if it would be the best service to the.
What? 1 second. Estuary, like everywhere across the board, or in your specific area?
No, not in my specific area. So that like I don't want to name names, but there has been talks of like, oh well, since mostly men come, maybe it should be a male thing and create a male support group and meeting. And like I understand that. I'm not a person that doesn't think that there can be benefits to like splitting the sexes, but part of me wonders how helpful will that be in understanding the full picture of what's happening with the meaning crisis? Because there's certainly like the male side, but there's a female side too. And I don't think
it's a prerequisite. I'm sorry if I cut you off. Just I'm sorry if I'm messing up the translation, but Eve is presented as an ezer kenegdo, an assistant against him, right? Which is like sort of contradictory, but the idea is that like the wife, is completes the man in a sense where like acts as the contradiction or acts as there's a dichotomy there, which is necessary. So like it's not like you're missing out on the perspective, like you're literally closing one eye because like it's not. And again, I would concur that it's okay to have male spaces and like get that.
Yeah.
And
Well,
searching for meaning.
I think it would be fine to like if a group decided, like an individual group decided, hey, this is a male only or a female only, like okay, that's that's fine. But to have it on the whole level, like it doesn't. There's certainly a lot less women in this space than there are men, but like we still are there, and like I do think I do think if we can find a way to embrace femininity and not try to enter these conversations like the men do, like there's a lot of good that can come from that, where we can like learn from each other. And yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say if we could dwell on that for a minute.
Yeah.
So my interest, and from what I've seen, the interest of many different individuals over here is that there's definitely a wanting for more of a female participation, and I believe that's coming from, not just because men want women involved over here, because I think they're just like what you are articulating over here. They want that, even though I don't think it would even be bad that there would be like a social sort of like mingling also.
Yeah.
There's room for that. Obviously, if downstream you could see how this little corner would have its own like dating world. But this would relate.
The estuary bachelor.
Right. The women in this corner, I wonder if being like I don't know if it's champions. Do you have a sense of how many women are actually involved? Like, do people reach out to you saying like, "Hey, I'm a lurker." I don't know if that's like a derogatory term, but like I'm here and I'm involved, but like I just don't want to be in the space. And whether it's a little or a lot, which is something I'd be interested in, um, what are the reasons there's a hesitancy to engage? Let's say you could say like you and Andrea and some others, like they're down to talk. Is it because the space is too like, I don't know, I'm not saying like much like alpha energy in any of these like, conversations. So
It's
like,
full of toxic masculinity.
right. So I mean, I don't sense that much. Um, so yeah, I guess if you could sort of enrich me.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure exactly what it is. I mean, I think there are certain things of like, um, women are generally more vulnerable. And so being vulnerable in the way you have to be in estuary with a bunch of men is not something normal for women. And in fact, like a lot of the women have asked for like separate, like maybe we can have separate groups for the estuary for women so that like we can talk about more sensitive things, which is very understandable. But on the other end, like there's the fear on my end, like, well, if we give a corner for the women, are we going to self-segregate into places where here are the men, here are the women, and then we're not having these cross dialogues, which have been very helpful. And like there's like again, there's times and places for that because there are certain groups where they're like the women did like knitting club, and they tried to keep it mostly women and have that ability to like talk female to female, and those can be very helpful. But but there's that ability of both. And so I mean, and part of it's discord in the structure of that. I just don't know how many women want to deal with that barrier of like what it takes to get in and join the conversation. And there's a little more hesitancy in those things. But yeah, it's hard to, I think everyone's a little bit different. And I don't see myself as the typical woman, but I don't think most women who enter the estuary are the typical woman, in the sense that I think there's a lot of masculine qualities. One has to have a keenness to, or a draw to swim enough to make connections. But yeah, I wish I knew, and like I wish I knew how we could make it friendlier for those things. And like there's always the question of like, is it sustainable long term for men and women to do this stuff? Because there's always these weird tensions. And I think for some people it's like, when you're married, that becomes a little bit tricky too, of like, how long do you talk to these single guys on the internet? And like there's a lot of questions for the women of that, of like, I don't know how to orient myself and create proper boundaries and relationships, which is fair enough. Like I think it is like it is tricky in a certain sense.
Specifically, as you were describing that, and just saying, with being also so open and so vulnerable and talking about like such deep things, you could find yourself intentionally or unintentionally in like a intertwined relationship without even knowing it many times. Like you could see like I've spilled my soul to this person and like they're understanding me and they're like, I'm not feeling this here or there or home. Like that could create a big tension. So
Yeah.
right, it's that does get dangerous, and that relates to what you were saying, just because from a society we've created like these rules and these structures that now like we're locked into, in a sense, into some of these patterns which are extremely strong or have a tremendous amount of grip on us.
Mm.
But on the flip side, there was this stream going on, and then Nahama jumped in and she like lashed out at everyone. She's like, not like intensely, but she just said like, you're using silly terminology, this is silly, you're saying this, and all of us were sort of like, you're right, that's silly, we were just being ridiculous, thank you. And I don't know, I think that's healthy. And
Yeah.
I would also want to know how spaces like that could happen, sort of more naturally. But I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what we're trying to work out. And that's why the events for me have been a passion, because I think that gives the tools to help create those spaces where people can have those more organically grow within communities. And like, I don't know, in some ways putting on the events feels like a feminine act. It's like creating space
Okay.
and like to bring in and like be a host in certain terms. And yeah, there's I don't know, there was just a joy to see the way that these people connected and the way they're still connecting. And like we're planning our second one for October. And so seeing some of those same people on board to help and make this one successful has been it's just been lovely. And I mean, I feel grateful the church community that we found. They have a lot of like-minded people and a lot of people who have a similar spirit to what we see in the estuary there. So that's been nice to have around, like in my home community, to feel like I can still have those conversations without always having to go on the internet. And that's what, and honestly, that's probably a big reason why outside of what I do here, I don't spend as much time on the Discord as I used to. And that's always been the hope, right? It's bridges of meaning is a bridge. You can't build a home on it. You gotta cross over and find a nice plot of land and build something or join a community of some sort. And yeah, if we could find better ways to kind of have those planted within localized pods where like people who are making decisions are the people there in the communities and taking responsibility of those things, I think you'll have a better sense of how to handle that communally and like what is the healthy way to kind of have those things. But it also can get messy.
As you're describing that, though, it seems to me as if you would be a graduating member of like Discord, right? Where like you are playing around in these waters, and then you like our model of not only do you navigate these waters well, but you identify someone across the pond, and you manage to obviously through this medium to create a relationship. Also, run these events to, you like you just said, so you made it across this bridge in a certain sense. It doesn't mean you don't have other bridges that you're still crossing or trying to find.
Yeah.
But, and this is the conversation that is brought up here about like on-ramping people, or when Moses needs to come down with the tablets, right? There's coming back to the people going back on that bridge and assisting other people across, and like you just said, creating like these little hubs. So to to resurface as married Cassidy, soon to be mother Cassidy, please God, that is showing to the people that are still there, being like, look how the model is happening. And like you said, it's still messy, both, conceptually all the way down to actually messy diapers, right? Like it's messy and people get to see that. So, as far as like what you're doing over here, like you're saying about writing the script, I think there, that's sort of what people need to see is that, which is like, I'm now bringing it back to you, and I don't come back to you on the bridge with like all these answers, but I come back with a foundation saying I made it through. And part of that making that through included decisions of oriented enough to say, yes, I love you. And yes, I want to now create with you. And yes, I'm still involved and interested in engaging in this conversation. So the corner benefits greatly from your example and your courage.
Yeah, well, it's funny, when I found estuary, I was very lost. Like I was settled in my trust with Christianity, but like I had no idea how to orient myself in church anymore. I'd just seen too much to where like nothing felt quite right. But like I I couldn't abandon it. So like I did the best that I could. And so I found it. And so I went into the frontier. I headed to the west and I found the east. And yeah, I just have such love for it. And like it just makes sense of my world in ways that nothing else has. And like, there's just sort of like a quiet peace with it. And so like, I've really been trying to, find my home with it and my stride with that, and like, deal with the ups and downs of what it is to embrace a completely different culture, and like allow that to like shape you and change you. And and like with the events, there is this other part too, where it's like, to be so involved in like the day-to-day and the casual aspect of uh the estuary part sometimes makes it more difficult to like run these events and do these things, because it gets a little bit messier. And so I've thought about that too, of like how much does it make practical sense to keep going back and trying to recapture this thing that I might have not outgrown, but like found a different frame for it. But it's difficult because it's like, it's a bittersweet thing where you love this thing, you don't want to see it die. And like the way that it will die is if too many people leave and don't come back. But in the other hand, it's like, well, if the point was not for people to live there, if the bridge gets run down, there will be others built. And, there will be other people to take care of that bridge, and like the homes and the lives that have like been created, to me, are more important. And like the seeds that were planted that will build other things are more important to me than keeping this little thing going as we always knew it. It's like, well, it's never gonna always be the same. There's always gonna be changes, and especially with something like that requires so much diversity, that requires so much new blood coming in. Yeah, it's not something fully controllable. And like in a lot of ways, it seems like the bridges of meaning is cyclical too, where it's like, it eventually you're there long enough. It's like, oh, we had this conversation, but 3 years ago.
Oh,
And
that no doubt. I I there's like a Voxer group that like we use, and it's very nice. But sometimes you get locked into, you're like, right, like this, people like almost get into their set of like, right, you're gonna say this, and that's that line. However, I do think that even there are snippets of,
yeah,
developments.
yeah,
So there's this it's a website like This Little Corner. Have you ever seen this like website?
yeah.
Right. So on it, someone put a chat GPT where on the videos now you could ask it to summarize the video for you. Like this hour stream, it'll give you like a summary of the whole stream.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's nuts.
It's
And
so weird.
it's weird, but suddenly you're like, this is a also very interesting tool to sort of introduce over here, where you could then really be taking, and Grimm plays around this, like, with this term about reaping and looming and like taking out videos, but in this 6 hour consciousness stream that Jacob's having, right? Suddenly you're saying like, okay, there is gold over here, and that like I'm taking this out, and that allows me to now identify that within
Mm.
6 hours. I could really comb it down within like 30 minutes. You have like a beautiful little understanding of here, and you could start identifying different things, different patterns. So it could be helpful to allow a corner like this to not, like you said, not be exactly the same, but allow for, and this is Paul's hope, that these little channels will continue, or you have your channel and Jacob, right, that they'll spring. But he seems to still be sort of the sun, right, where things like sort of, but I don't know. I think people are doing interesting stuff over here.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a beauty in having the little channels, because what Jacob is going to bring and the people he's going to attract are very different than what I can bring and what people I'm going to attract. And there's different styles, and there's different orders, and like having those different flavors, I think helps people connect with the thing that's most salient to them. And like that's, I think as humans, we're all wired a bit differently. And there's some people that like you're gonna connect. And like even if you don't have the same beliefs or whatever, there's this like this language that you speak that is compatible enough to make things interesting. And then there's some people that's just gonna totally disconnect. And part of like estuary is like a bit of that journey of like finding those people that like spark something in you, that draw something out of you, and finding ways to like engage in that well and be open to those things.
which is so which is what is so pleasurable about watching the random conversations.
Mm.
People successfully always manage to like fully engage and sort of like Joe Rogan level of curiosity, sort of like fully like lock in and be with him. Where in a certain sense he's a common denominator. We're like, listen, this guy's like not my speed, but I like Paul, and if Paul likes him, then like it's sort of like a litmus test, sort of. And even this little corner, Jacob's a fire breather, but
Yes, and I'm a
but
daisy.
it's almost if it's coming from love, obviously.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's almost like there. I say that I'm saying this openly because again I they feel comfortable. But there's always like this tension between like Nate and Jacob and Grail Country. But they both seem to really enjoy talking to me. And I enjoy talking to both of them. And I think that is in a certain way enough for them to know that they are in that same community, even if it doesn't mean that they are enjoying themselves. They know that they're like, but these other individuals are not insane. And these people, like, I'm happy that that guy's in his corner and I'm in my corner, but I'm happy that he's together with me in this corner. And I think people need to also realize that that's okay. Because back to my window analogy, it could be uh, the tribe of Ruvain was looking down like 7 rows down, and he's like, I'm really not down with like Dan tribe, but it's okay. Like as long as I recognize that the path is proper, and I recognize that we're still using ourselves for orientation, that is still a beautiful level of respect and love that just doesn't have to mean they're cuddling.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. So when Jacob was on the Discord a while, there was another member, Charlie. And if you looked at the forum and you looked at some of the chats, you'd go, oh my gosh, these people hate each other.
Right.
Yet the longer it's like this is just Jacob and Charlie. They're gonna fight, they're gonna go to the forum, someone's gonna force quit, and then 2 days later, they're gonna be like, I'm so sorry. And then they'll be best friends and they went camping together. It's like it's this weird world that we live in with the estuary where and I think this has somewhat to do with like the masculine energy of it too, where like 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 sparks fly and people duel it out and find the orientation for them to do those things, right? Like there's certain things like we're like there are certain things that draw the line that admin doesn't want to deal with, and so like they're out. But like if you want to fight about Catholicism and fundamentalist Christianity, fine, but like go to the forum. Duke it out there, like find that way to do it. But it's like that, and that's where it's not a safe space, where like there's a lot of fighting going on, there's a lot of like back and forth, there's a lot of challenging going on, but there's that space where like you allow it to happen and you try to find that place to let people orient to it, because unless you're around someone who thinks differently than you, how are you going to ever be challenged by the thing that toes the line, right?
Yes, it also requires, and this is something that I I don't think people are necessarily sensitive enough to. However, it's very hard to set up this like sort of level of expectation. But in a certain sense, you say like you're coming into this brave space. Like, listen, if you're gonna get like rattled by me, like pointing out like Corinthians X, like then don't be here. On the other hand, while you could have that attitude that if someone's here, they're like you are allowed to express yourself freely. You have to realize that for some people, this like a bad conversation of here could be potentially very harmful.
Yeah.
Uh, and harmful in a way like, I hear some stories about, people that, are clinically depressed, suicidal, not great stuff. Now you could be like, well, listen, you can't be bringing that kind of baggage online to like, some random Jew in Israel right now. Like, what do you want him to do with that kind of package? On the other hand, you've also opened up the floodgates, like you're to like about the sense of responsibility. Like, but let's say that guy is talking to you, that girl is talking to you. What are you gonna just like, sorry, internet connections and like, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so when you've cultivated a space that is loving and understanding, you're going to have people that are going to, in a certain sense, like want to drain some of that, not purposely, but they're gonna need a lot of that. And then you got to see if you've created a space that could, at the very least, route real trouble to potential responsible people.
Right. Well, that's where I feel like, and I've always said estuary is not for everybody and it's not healthy for all people at all times. And that's why I don't ever want it to be oriented like a church because that's um that's not, I don't think that's a proper orientation of what this is. But like there's certainly times where the style in which we operate, the way in which we come towards questions is not going to be the best place for someone. I think especially those who are struggling with mental health problems, and like in the darkest moments of those things. This sometimes can be a place to help, but it also can be a place that drives you deeper into it because it's this escape into this thing that's continually disconnecting you from reality. And so there's that really tricky balance with those things. And I mean, like I've struggled with my own mental health things myself. And I think about that often of like, well, when facing someone who is struggling themselves and like you see it, yet they live 7,000 miles away. What do you do? Like at a certain point, it's like you can't help them the same way you could if they were your neighbor or they were your family member who lived 5 blocks down. There's a level in which like you are limited in capacities to help, and sometimes the best thing to help is to disconnect. But it's
Or to send that energy elsewhere. Like you have to imagine, you get off a Zoom like this, and then you're like, I need to do something, and people around you are like, there's a beggar on the street, like that's not 7,000 miles away. Like you could also be focusing your energy like locally,
yeah,
or like it goes all the way to you know because of this Zoom, am I going to be tired making breakfast for my kids in the morning? And then was it like, well,
yeah,
wasn't that like real? Like,
yeah,
so that's on you, Cassidy.
yeah.
That's on you.
Oh, thank you. I'll keep that in my reminders of
It just people need to take that, like, you could be having you have to realize that if you're going to have like a deep conversation with someone online for 8 hours, then you could be their person.
Mm,
And without intentionally, you're like suddenly you're like in a drama role with them. We're like, oh, now I'm here.
yeah.
And
Yes, it's a very odd it's a very odd dynamic. I mean, like and it's crazy too, because it's like that's how I met my husband. I met my husband through the Discord. We had a friendship. and, you know, pretty quickly realized, oh, hey, this might be something more. And then we gave it a shot, and like, here I am 2 years later, you know, married.
Amazing.
And, you know, and so it's like, on one hand, it's like, I see the beauty of this thing, and I'm not the only one that's happened to, right? Like, I'm not I am the second of the marriages and children from bridges of meaning, friendship to family. And so there's like this beauty in life and this like real support that you can get when you can learn to like ground it in reality. Yet it's a double-edged sword. There's a whole other side of like darkness. And when you're willing to be vulnerable, there are certainly people who would like to take advantage of those things, whether they mean to or not. Because sometimes I think people who do that without even recognizing that's what they're doing. And so we're having to learn like these boundaries and these sort of weird functionings with what is essentially strangers on the internet. And that's that one I don't think we've wrestled fully with. I don't think we've recognized the extent to what that's going to mean. But something to wrestle with.
Is it like when you said as strangers on the internet, and I think about it like, we spoke like, that once on that, but I don't, it doesn't feel strange talking to you though.
No, well, but we've both seen each other's faces around. We have mutual friends, like,
I guess so. It just
So
doesn't feel, because as you say, you're like, it is random. Like,
well, this is
why?
our second conversation ever,
Right.
you know, face to face. But I've seen you talk to Paul. I've seen you talk to others. I know you know Jacob. Jacob was at my wedding.
Oh, right. Yeah, you mentioned that. That's so cool.
So it's like in some weird, it's like, hey, we're mutual friends. But also, yeah, in all reality, like, I don't know you from Adam. But that's the beauty of this too, right? Like, and that's why I like what Paul does. And I think his rando conversations are the strongest thing that he offers to the table. Even I don't know how popular they are in the grand scheme of things, but like for me, I think that's the gold that Paul brings, because he takes normies and he talks to them like Joe Rogan would talk to people. And what's amazing about that is like when Joe Rogan talks to people, he's talking to people who are public figures who have something to say or promote. And so they do have their own sort of masks, and, they drop, and, they're probably more friendly to Joe Rogan than others sort of interviews. But like, there's still that level in which like, there's that recognition in the back of their head of like, this, people are watching. And like, you get on a randos conversation, people are watching, but you're still just a normal person. And so there's so much more to learn from their lives, and like to resonate with their stories that are beautiful. And that's and like, I don't know, I'm kind of a weirdo. I can make friends with anybody. And it's probably just been traveling and living internationally. You kind of have to learn how to like talk to anyone at any time, but I talk to strangers all the time. Not as much now that I don't speak Dutch very well, but just like at the grocery store, or you're in a bar and you just strike up conversations, and like there's something beautiful about that. And that's where like the internet in some ways makes it a bit safer to have those sort of conversations with strangers. But there's also a whole nother level of like uncertainty, of like you have no concept of like the connection. And so it's helpful to have connections like this little corner where I can say, oh, you're not a stranger to me, in the sense that I've seen you around, I know who you are, and like I've gotten a sense of how you operate.
I've seen you around. It's like interesting because like it's almost like I mean like this little virtual world where we're like, I've seen him around the mall. Like he walked in there, he walked in there.
I saw him in the cafeteria. Yeah.
Right. It's that shirt he's wearing.
Yeah.
It's nice. Well, I think you do a fantastic job creating a very comfortable
Sorry, your voice skipped on that last part.
I said you do a great job creating a comfortable space where it feels very open and genuine and not like at all like interviewee. It just feels like the conversation.
Well, good. I hope that's how it is. I don't like to be too interview, and that's I really don't talk to many like prominent people. Like I've inquired about a couple people, but mostly people I find fascinating that I just want to ask them a bunch of questions. But I like talking to normies. I think it's so much easier to have a conversation. I think you just learn a lot from them too. Like some of the wisest people I know, and the people who've given me the best advice are people that no one knows them from Adam. And like, I just think there's something beautiful about that.
Well, I think the internet has shown us that. I used this example once with Michael Jackson, which growing up, like Michael Jackson, like doing the moonwalk was like, wow, like this guy's like the best dancer. And then you realize with the internet, like everyone can moonwalk. And everyone, like every kid on American Got Talent, like, oh my God, everyone sounds amazing. So you realize, like, when Paul talks about his random conversations, you put a lens on someone, like they're gonna shine in many cases, and like there's a lot of talent out there, and you want to say like, oh, it's participation medals, which I'm very much against, but in a sense, everyone is special, and um, the internet has allowed for that. So you could someone like Grimm, right? You're like, oh wow, this is like an interesting person.
Yeah.
So it, and it takes someone like you to allow for that kind of space and those questions. And I'm not saying I'm that person. I'm just saying allowing for a space like that for for being curious, being genuine, and allowing a space where that can happen, where someone feels, oh wow, I have something to say. It is interesting. Someone's understanding me and engaging with me. All fascinating.
Yeah. Well, like in Orthodoxy, human beings, we're all icons, right? So we're all these like windows into heaven, and the understanding of like we reflect the divine. And so there is something in that sense of like every human being is they're reflecting God. And, we're all in some participation with the divine in different levels. And so, there's the level in which like when you orient yourself in the right practices, it can get you closer and teach you more about what it is to be truly human. But
And vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah.
When Jacob is sleeping, when he's running away from Esau, as his famous Jacob's ladder dream, no pun intended on Jacob. But they just teach us that the angels were congregating, and they wanted to harm Jacob because like he wasn't like at the proper level yet, and they said, we see the Jacob in heaven, and it doesn't match at all the Jacob that's down here. As in, we see the potentiality of what he'll turn into Israel, but we're just seeing like this version over here. And people need to remember there's our divine self that's like that's mirroring God's image, but we need to fill up that potentiality. Like we need to step up and climb up those ladders, and at times we could look very different from what our potential is.
Yeah.
And it sometimes read the proper lighting, and sometimes our fellow uh our fellow our neighbors, our friends, our community sometimes needs to assist us in shining or showing us that reflection which we are very scared to see. And when you in a conversation allow someone to assist someone to open up about themselves, or allow them to frame themselves in a proper way where you can see they're lost, and then create a mirror where they're like, and this goes back to identifying that evil person and finding the good in him, and let him seeing what you see in him.
Yeah. Yeah, there's well, and there's something too, the more that I delve into Christianity, the more I commit my life to it, the more I realize that what it looks like to climb that ladder is often very counterintuitive to the cultures we're seeped in. And there's a lot, so it's sort of, that upside down kingdom. Where, the meek will inherit the earth and all those things that Jesus says. But there's that, there's that, I don't know, there's that like humbling moment where you're like, oh, wow, like, I don't know at all how to do this. I kind of have to put my trust in something bigger to learn this thing. And there's a lot of difficulty in that, but a whole level of beauty with it too. Well, we're coming towards 2 hours. Is there any last questions, thoughts, things we didn't quite get to?
We covered a lot.
Yes, we went all over the map.
Yeah,
I don't remember where we started.
Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for creating the space. Keep on keeping on, and I hope definitely in the next couple months, specifically with the baby, hopefully that the house full of peace, love, and tranquility. And take your time. It's a process.
Well, thank you, Chezi. I appreciate you coming on and talking with me.
Of course, thank you. Hopefully, I'll see you around the streets. See you around the market.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much for watching. As always, I will close with the Serenity Prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.